Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone. Today we're tackling a question that sounds like it's straight out of science fiction, but has some surprisingly serious science behind it. Ready for this? What if, and just hear me out, what if we're all living in a giant simulation?
Whoa. Okay, I'm intrigued.
I know, right? It sounds kind of wild. But it's a question that's got some serious thinkers talking. We're diving deep into a fascinating YouTube video transcript that explores this whole simulation hypothesis. And get this, it really digs into the theories of a physicist named Melvin Vopson.
Melvin Vopson, that name rings a bell. He's doing some really interesting work.
He is. But before we get to all of that, did you know that a surprising number of big names in science and tech have actually entertained this whole simulation idea?
Really? Like who?
Well, I'm talking about people like Elon Musk, Neil deGrasse Tyson, definitely not your average conspiracy theorists.
That's true. They both definitely have a way of making you think differently about things.
Exactly. And our source material jumps right into some of these mind-bending ideas. Like, did you know there's a physicist, Seth Lloyd, who's actually suggested the entire universe could be one giant quantum computer processing information on a scale we can't even fathom?
Yeah, I've heard about that theory. It's like, what even is reality if that's true?
I know. It's like trying to imagine a color you've never seen before.
Yeah.
And then there's this philosopher, Nick Bostrom, who's come up with this whole statistical argument. He says, and this is a big if, but if future civilizations have the tech to create really convincing simulations like indistinguishable from reality, then statistically, there are probably more simulated universes out there than real ones.
Okay, now my mind is officially blown. So you're saying there's a chance we're not in the original, but a copy.
Yeah. Following that logic, it's more likely that we're in a simulation right now than in what he calls base reality.
It's enough to make you want to look for glitches in the matrix.
Right. Which is kind of what Melvin Vopson is trying to do. He's got this theory that the very fabric of the universe, like the basic building blocks of everything, are made up of, get this, information.
Information like ones and zeros, code.
Yes, exactly, like lines of code in a computer program. And if that's true, he says it would mean our universe is, by definition, simulatable.
Okay, I can see where he's going with this. It's like saying if the universe is basically information, then it could be running on some kind of cosmic computer program.
Exactly, and that's where things get really interesting.
It's a really fascinating idea, but there's a but, right?
A big one. We're talking about information, like the stuff on our computers, actually having weight. That's wild.
Right. It's such a mind-bending concept. And to test it out, Vopson has proposed this really ambitious experiment using, get this, a particle collider.
Whoa, a particle collider, like the Large Hadron Collider. What's he planning to do? Smash some atoms and see if information spills out?
It's kind of like that, actually. His idea is to smash particles and antiparticles together at incredibly high speeds. Now, his theory is that if our reality is actually a simulation, this collision could, like, shake loose tiny bits of information. Like, imagine little pieces of code escaping from a glitch in a video game.
Okay, now that is some serious next-level thinking. But hold on, it gets even wilder, because Vopson then goes on to claim he's found evidence for this simulation in the Bible.
Yeah, that's where things take a bit of an unexpected turn. He points to a specific line from the Gospel of Juan, in the beginning was the Word.
Right, I've heard that one.
So Vopson's interpretation is that the Word could actually represent, like, the original code, the source code of the simulation, which would mean God is the programmer, or maybe even some kind of super advanced AI running the whole show.
It's such a wild connection to make.
Yeah.
Linking, like, cutting-edge physics to ancient religious texts is like, whoa.
It's definitely thought-provoking. But let's, zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture. Biblical interpretations aside, what are the actual arguments for and against this simulation idea?
Okay, yeah, let's break it down. So what's the evidence, if any, that we're actually in a simulation?
Right, so on the pro side, there's Bostrom's argument, the statistical likelihood thing, right? If a civilization gets advanced enough to create these super realistic simulations, then statistically there are probably more simulated universes out there than real ones.
So the odds are in favor of us being in a simulation. That's a trip. What else?
Well, you've got the whole exponential growth in computing power, right? We've come a long way from Pong. So it stands to reason that someday we might actually have the capability to create a simulation as complex as our universe. And if we could do it in the future, who's to say someone or something hasn't already done it?
True. And haven't there been some weird things happening in the quantum physics world lately? Things that kind of hint at a simulated reality?
Oh, absolutely. Quantum physics is full of these mind-bending phenomena that really challenge our understanding of reality. Things like, for example, observer-dependent reality.
Hold on, observer-dependent reality. What in the matrix is that?
Well, have you ever had that feeling that just by looking for something, you change whether or not you find
Oh,
it?
yeah, all the time. Like when you lose your keys, but then as soon as you stop looking, they magically appear.
Exactly. So quantum physics actually suggests that at the subatomic level, particles exist in a kind of blurry state of possibilities until they're observed. It's only when we observe them that they collapse into a definite state.
Whoa. You're saying our consciousness, like the act of us observing something, could actually be influencing reality.
It's one interpretation, and it's a concept that still has even the smartest physicists scratching their heads. But this is exactly the kind of weirdness that makes some people think, hey, maybe our reality is more malleable than we think. Maybe it's even programmable.
Okay, so we've got the simulation argument, we've got the whole thing about technology advancing, we've got quantum weirdness. Anything else?
Yeah, there's also the big mystery of consciousness itself, right? Like, what is consciousness? If our minds are just information being processed, could they be simulated too?
That's a great question. It's like, what separates a really advanced computer program from actual consciousness? And then there are those moments where you feel like time slows down or you have this weird feeling of premonition. Could those be glitches in the matrix?
It's certainly one way to look at it, but, it's not all sunshine and simulated rainbows. There are some pretty strong arguments against the simulation hypothesis, too. For one thing, we have absolutely zero direct evidence to suggest we're living in a simulation. It's still a very theoretical concept.
That's a good point. And even if we could theoretically create a simulation as complex as our universe, wouldn't that take an insane amount of computational power? I mean, where would that even come from?
Right. That's a question that comes up a lot, and some proponents of the simulation hypothesis say that maybe we just don't understand the full potential of computing power yet. Maybe there are forms of energy or technology that we haven't even dreamed of that could make something like this possible.
Okay, I can kind of see that. But even then, who created the simulation in the first place? And why? If our reality is simulated, doesn't that mean there has to be a real reality to host the simulation? Which just pushes the question back another level, right?
Exactly. It becomes a bit of an infinite loop. And what about the problem of suffering and evil in a world that's supposed to be designed? If we are in a simulation, why would the creators allow for all the bad things that happen? It's hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, it doesn't really make sense. And even if we could somehow prove we're in a simulation, wouldn't that proof itself be subject to the rules of the simulation?
Exactly. That's the big issue of falsifiability. It's like even if we're in a simulation, we might be inherently limited in our ability to definitively prove or disprove it. It's like we could be trapped in a cage of our own perception, forever kept from seeing the true nature of reality.
Whoa, that's kind of scary, but also really intriguing. You know, while we were going through all of this, I came across another physicist, Thomas Campbell, who has some really interesting ideas about consciousness and how it might connect to the simulation hypothesis.
Ah, yes. Thomas Campbell. His work gets into some pretty mind-blowing territory where physics starts to sound a lot like, well, metaphysics.
Yeah, exactly. So how does Campbell approach the whole simulation thing?
Well, his big idea is that consciousness isn't just something that our brains produce. He thinks it's a fundamental aspect of reality itself, maybe even the most fundamental aspect.
So instead of our brains creating consciousness, they're picking up on some kind of universal consciousness that's already out there.
Exactly. It's like our brains are receivers tuned into this broader field of consciousness that exists independently of the physical world.
Okay, now we're going deep down the rabbit hole,
Yeah.
but I'm here for it. So if our reality is a simulation and consciousness is fundamental, then what exactly is being simulated? Is it just the physical stuff around us, or is it more like we're all sharing in this massive simulated experience of consciousness?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it really
Right.
makes you think about all those unexplainable phenomena we experience. Like, what about things like déjà vu, psychic experiences, precognitive dreams? Do those things suddenly make more sense if we're living in a simulation?
Right. Or what about those crazy coincidences that happen sometimes? Like the odds of that happening are astronomical. Is that the simulation showing its hand?
It's easy to jump to those conclusions, and it's something that a lot of people who believe in the simulation theory bring up. But it's important to remember that just because we can't explain something yet doesn't automatically mean it's evidence of a simulated reality. There could be perfectly logical explanations that we just haven't discovered yet.
Right. Don't jump to conclusions.
Exactly. But I think that's the beauty of all of this. Even just thinking about these ideas, even the ones that seem totally out there, forces us to ask big questions and look at the world with a sense of wonder and curiosity.
I totally agree. It's like the more we learn, the more we realize how much we don't know.
Exactly. And this deep dive has really been all about that, hasn't it? Acknowledging the vastness of what we don't know and being open to the possibility that our understanding of reality could be completely wrong.
I love that. Okay, so let's say, just for fun, that we're living in a simulation. Does that change how we should live our lives? Should we be doing anything differently? Should I be more concerned with paying taxes?
Now that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Like, if we knew for sure we were just characters in some kind of grand cosmic video game, would we take more risks? Would we value our relationships differently? Would any of it even matter?
Whoa, that's deep. But, speaking of going deep, remember how we talked about Vopson's idea that information is like the underlying code of the universe?
Yes.
Well, he's not the only one who has made a connection between information and the possibility of a simulated universe. Apparently, there are these things called symmetry laws in physics. And some scientists think they could actually be evidence of a simulated reality.
Oh, yes. The symmetry laws. Those are some of the most fundamental principles in all of physics.
Yeah, and I have to admit, I'm a little fuzzy on those. Can you refresh my memory? What are symmetry laws again?
They basically describe how physical systems behave the same way, even if you change their orientation or you move them around in space or time.
So, like, gravity works the same way here on Earth as it does on some distant planet in a galaxy far, far away.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does that connect to the simulation idea? Okay, so I think I'm starting to get it, but help me out here. How do symmetry laws, like the idea that gravity works the same everywhere, how does that connect to us possibly living in a simulation?
Well, imagine it like this. In a video game, the rules of physics are often simplified.
Right.
Like, the programmers use the same basic code to make everything work, from the smallest object to the entire world. It's all about efficiency, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. You don't want the game to crash because the physics engine's too complicated.
Exactly. So some scientists believe that these symmetry laws in physics could be like the underlying code of our universe, making sure everything runs smoothly and consistently, no matter where you are or when you are.
So it's like the programmer of our simulated reality found a shortcut, using the same basic rules to govern everything and keep the whole thing, from crashing.
It's a fascinating possibility to consider, isn't it? Though it's super important to remember that this is just one interpretation of the symmetry laws. And there are other scientific explanations that don't involve us living in a giant video game.
Right. Always good to be a little skeptical.
Yeah.
But honestly, this whole thing is just mind-blowing. Even if it turns out that we're not living in a simulation, it's incredible to think that something as fundamental as the laws of physics could even hint at a deeper level of reality.
I agree. This deep dive has really opened up some new perspectives for me. It's like, even if we never definitively answer the question, are we living in a simulation? Or the very act of exploring it pushes us to think differently about the nature of reality, about consciousness, about our place in the grand scheme of things. It's pretty amazing.
It really is. And you know what? It also brings up a whole bunch of other intriguing questions, like if we are in a simulation, who are these brilliant programmers who created it? Are they benevolent creators, indifferent observers, or maybe something else entirely? And what's their purpose in running this massive simulation of ours? To learn, to be entertained? Or is there some grand cosmic reason we can't even comprehend?
Those are great questions. Questions that might be better suited for another deep dive. Or maybe just a late-night philosophical conversation.
Always down for a good philosophical chat. But I think we've reached the end of our journey into the simulation hypothesis, at least for today.
Yes, but before we go, I think it's important to leave our listeners with something to really ponder. Like, if we are living in a simulation, what are the implications? What new possibilities does that open up? Could we somehow, hack the system, break free?
Or even create our own simulations.
Right. Mind-blowing. The line between science fiction and reality is getting blurrier every day, isn't it?
It really is. And that's what makes all of this so exciting. So to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this amazing deep dive into the simulation hypothesis. It's been an incredible ride. And until next time, keep those questions coming, keep exploring, and always be on the lookout for those glitches in the matrix.